mentioned, I'll give a little bit of an introduction to myself as I start the presentation. I think we had like one person answer the question. Okay, two people. So I'll give you all a chance to answer that opening question on a scale of 1 to 5. How is the diversity in your classroom today? And so that is really relevant to the conversation that we're going to have about entrepreneurship and about Black entrepreneurship, because our conversation today is actually going to be grounded in Black history and the purpose of Black History Month as it was originally intended by its founder. So I'm excited today. I see that we have 3 4s, 3.5, 4. So for the most part, we're rating our level of diversity fairly high, which is really great. And I hope by the end of this presentation, you'll have a really good sense of what diversity means to you, because that's, as a researcher, one of the biggest things that I spend time talking to people about, whether it was with my research in risk-taking or diversity and the work that I do with schools and with classrooms, that having a precision around these sort of larger buzzwords that we use and understanding exactly not only what they mean in the general context, but what they mean to us as individuals, and then how we plan to use them or how we plan to measure whether or not we're reaching those goals is very, very important to me. So as you answer the question, also think about what exactly does diversity mean to you and what do you want it to mean in the context of your classroom. So Robin, if it's okay with you, I think I'm going to kick off the presentation.
Excellent. Go for it. Thank you.
Okay. So I know we are all got lots to do. So hopefully this is a good use of your time. That at least was my goal. So the presentation here is about, really, like I told you, we're talking about Black history, but we're talking about that in the context of Black entrepreneurship. And the reason that I went for a newspaper theme for this presentation was because I really want to talk about and highlight the stories that are happening, the importance of stories as we think about Black entrepreneurship, as we think about Black history. And in thinking about that, there are two big stories in Black entrepreneurship that I wanted to start this presentation with. One of those being, if you haven't heard of them before, Blavity Inc. is a Black-owned media giant, and they are really, really incredible. They were founded to focus on Black stories and Black culture and sharing that with as big an audience as possible. They now own multiple brands, from conferences to news to magazines and articles and blogs, and they serve an audience of over 250 million people. One of their founders' biggest priorities was demonstrating that there was a large enough audience, there were enough people to support a profitable company that wanted to hear and learn about Black stories and Black experiences. On the flip side, we have an organization, an initiative called 15% Pledge, which is focused on getting 15% of the products on the shelves in big box retailers like Walmart, Target, and making sure that 15% of those brands are actually Black owned to represent the roughly 15% of America that is represented by Black and African American people. And so this organization has helped to get $14 billion in revenue in the hands of Black owned businesses. And so as we think about Black History Month, as we think about integrating Black stories and Black entrepreneurship into our classes, these are the kinds of stories that I would encourage you to share with your students. But big picture today, we're going to talk about, I'm going to give you a quick introduction to myself, very, very brief, because Robin already did a phenomenal job with getting that underway. And then I'm going to give you a very small history lesson about the origin of Black History Month and kind of how it came to be. We'll talk a little bit about how it's changed over time and the controversy about limiting Black history to a singular month. And then we'll get into some examples of Black History Month education and sort of expanding Black education around our history that are really good examples of what the original intention was for Black History Month. And then we'll get into some strategies that you can use to diversify your curriculum as it stands by using some resources that already exist. If there are any questions, feel free to let me know. I love questions. And so we'll have a Q&A portion at the end of the presentation. But this is me again. I don't think you need to see me one more time. My name is Dr. Deandra Taylor. I run a company called Mindset and Milestones. We're focused on entrepreneurship education, really integrating real world learning and project-based learning into classes, regardless of the subject that you teach. And I wanted to kind of open with this because for me, everything that I do is about education, and I was really excited to have a conversation about Black History Month in context with education and entrepreneurship. It's a lot of my favorite topics all in one. There we go. So, how did Black History Month start? It was started by a man named Dr. Carter G. Woodson. He was the second Black person to get a PhD from Harvard University, and his focus was in the history department. And it's really interesting because for him, history was an important tool for pushing forward the contributions of African American people to fight racism. And interestingly, in one of his history classes during his PhD at Harvard, he actually had a professor tell him that Black people didn't have history, that we had never done anything, and thus there was no need to study Black history or to, look into it because it didn't exist. Obviously, he knew that to be false, but he was in an academic environment where the people around him did not. And so his purpose behind pushing forward our history was to make it very clear that you can't remove Black people from the history of America, that we do have contributions, that we've done a lot to be a part of the fabric of what we should consider American history broadly. And so for him, he really viewed the erasure of Black people from history as a tool of racism, and thus fighting that as a tool of liberation. In addition to that, the purpose of sort of Black History Month actually started as a single week. So it originally was Negro History Week. It was 7 days long, and it was set for the second week of February, very specific because it was set around two birthdays of people that were very important to the progress of Black people in America. So the first was Frederick Douglass, whose birthday was February 14th, or more specifically celebrated February 14th because he actually didn't know when his birthday was. And then additionally, Abraham Lincoln, whose birthday was February 12th. They both fell on the same week. So he had for Negro History Week to be set on the second week of February. From there, the celebrations grew bigger. There were lots of movements, and one of the biggest places to move this were our teachers. His real purpose for Black History and for Negro History Week, what became Black History Month, was not actually for us to have a certain week or month out of the year. It was to start a larger conversation about how do you spark the integration of Black history into American history as a broader topic. The point was to diversify curricula as a whole. Unfortunately, we've fallen a little bit short of that original goal because we currently don't have any national mandates to teach Black history or to make it part of the classes that are required to graduate. But I will talk about some bright spots in a few moments. But a couple of things did happen that were in service to the movement. So he did die in 1950, but a few decades later, Black History Month was officially recognized by the country as the United States in 1976 by President Gerald Ford. He had several publications that were put together. There is an incredible organization that hosts a yearly conference to focus on integrating and teaching Black history, and then also pushing Black studies as an area of rigorous academic content and quality that's worthy of studying, that's something you can and should be allowed to get a degree in. Now, that said, there are lots of folks that don't love that we still have that we still have set Black History Month in the context of February, and that it in many ways can still be treated as a confinement to when we should and shouldn't be talking about Black people and their contributions to our country. Morgan Freeman, one of the most famous voices in this current issue, someone who, in his own words, finds Black History Month as a concept insulting. There are people who fall on several lines of the spectrum, but it's an interesting thing to consider because from his perspective, it is essentially the sanctioning of relegating Black history to a single point in the year, and thus sort of an opportunity to let people off the hook for not talking about it the rest of the year, that this is something that's specialized, and as soon as you finish talking about it in February, we'll get back to normal history, we'll get back to regular or real history. And all of those are problems. But I think that the original purpose of Black History Month, to start a conversation, to be a catalyst, is still serving that purpose. And that is my goal in this and having this conversation, being a part of this Power Hour today. So I want to talk about some stories that are doing this really well and that are serving the original purpose that Dr. Woodson had set out for what Black History Month could be and should be. The first is, if you haven't heard of it before, I know I learned a lot of new things in doing research for this talk, that there is an AP Black Studies course launched by the College Board. It was launched in a pilot phase 2 years ago in 2022. Over 700 high schools have since adopted and used the course, and now it's being launched officially in 2024. And outside of it just existing, I think one of the most powerful things about the course is to hear from students who had a different experience. There's a quote that I have in the presentation here from a high school junior who's a young Black girl, and she says, "It's an amazing feeling to hear something other than slavery and struggle, that we weren't always oppressed." And that was something that struck me very sort of acutely, because a lot of what we do learn about Black history is within the context of slavery, within the context of civil rights. But that Black people as a people have done a lot more outside of the context of oppression, and learning about that, learning about the innovation that existed in Africa before chattel slavery, learning about folks like Mansa Musa. There is so much wealth and knowledge that Black people have had and owned for centuries of time that a lot of Black American children don't get the opportunity to learn about. But in the same token, that a lot of non-Black children never get the chance to hear and to see. And so that brings us to the second point, that Philadelphia was the first major city in our country to mandate African American history as a course that students have to take in order to graduate from high school. And their perspective being that you can't fully understand the birth of America, what we've become, what we are, without understanding that the African American history that exists within that fabric and how interwoven they are to who we are as a people. And one of the notes that, one of their chief executive officers makes, and the article that I quoted this from, and I'm happy to share this with everyone, specifically mentions the fact that he is a white man, is because his perspective on this was very nuanced. His quote says, it benefits African American children who need more comprehensive understanding of their own culture. And it also benefits non-African Americans to understand the full totality of the American experience. And this, I believe, was, yes, put in 2005. So it's been going for 18 years now as a requirement that their students have had, despite the fact that the state of Pennsylvania doesn't have any requirements. The city has very much taken it into their own hands, and the students have been really happy with their outcomes. So as we talk about those things, we're going to get into some strategies that you can use to really integrate Black history and history in general from cultures that are not typically, or what's the right word I want to use, that are not represented in the right proportions to the space that they occupy in our country. And so the one thing that I want to focus on here is that these strategies work really well with the use of tools that are already intended to support Black History Month, Women's History Month, Asian American History Month, take your pick. Those are tools that typically focus on stories, on experiences, on highlighting those in those communities who are doing incredible work. And these strategies will allow you to take those tools and stretch them out and use them all the way through the year. So the first is called, I guess this is the word that I use for it. If there's a better word for it, or anyone has any other names, feel free to let me know. But I'm calling it for now an example audit. And essentially what this is that you go through your curriculum, or the curriculum that you have written, that you plan to follow, and then you assess the level of diversity within all of the examples that you plan on using. So think about diversity not just in the context of race and ethnicity, but also around gender, around age and class. All of those give the students a fuller picture about who entrepreneurs can be and what they can look like. So assess whether or not you feel like you have a good amount of diversity across those different axes. And then step two would be to identify places where there are replacements that you can make, that maybe we've seen a lot of the same type of person, and that I want to swap out this example for someone else. You can mark those, and then you can look at resources like the ones on YEI. I have one that I'll share with you all in towards the end of this presentation. But you can take those resources and pick examples from those resources that you think are really interesting stories that do lend to increasing the diversity in your curriculum or in the examples that you're using. And then you can integrate those examples by swapping out the ones that you felt like you wanted to replace, because you saw that there were opportunities for there to be more diversity across one of many, many axes that make up a full picture of entrepreneurship. The second is an entrepreneur of the day. This one is not incredibly unique, but if you don't do it, I highly recommend. And these resources will make that more efficient for you. And you'll see what I mean in a second. But first, you identify the different resources that you want to use, whether that's, 50 women entrepreneurs or 30 Black entrepreneurs or people who are focused in tech or agriculture. Identify all the resources that you think might be good fits for this. And then you can actually put them into a spreadsheet. And this is typically what I do when I'm teaching class. You can put them into a spreadsheet, randomize the order that they're in on that spreadsheet, and then assign all the days of your class to that to a particular entrepreneur. This is a little bit of what this might look like. So you have all of your entrepreneurs, you can just have their names, and then the date that you'd like to present them in is something you can start with the first date of your class and then just drag it down, because we love how efficient Excel and Google Sheets tools are. And then you can link to that resource so that every day it's really easy for you to just point and click and go directly to what you wanted to share without doing a ton of extra work, but really mixing in all different types of entrepreneurs into your entrepreneur of the day and being intentional about that from the very beginning, and making less work for yourself in the long run, because we love that. And then the last one is innovator presentations. I love, love, love these. I always learn so much from my students when we do them. These are a little bit better for older students. I recommend more 6th to 12th grade. The other two you can do with any grades. But you first assign the students to their presentation date. So that could be, have one student a week, 2 students a week, and then you can assign them either all at once, or you can take volunteers for 1 week to go the next week. But there'll be 1 to 3 minute presentations. The students will pick an innovator, and you can actually give them a list very similar to something like this. You can give them a list to choose from, and then they can pick ones that are interesting to them and decide to go deeper. Of course, you always give them the option to choose an entrepreneur of their own if you like, as long as they give approval first. And then they can prepare their presentations by answering 3 questions about that entrepreneur. What problem did they solve, or what sparked the idea for their solution? What's one challenge that this entrepreneur or innovator encountered during their journey? And then where is that innovator and their company or their creation today? And then finally, you just enjoy learning from all of your students as they talk about all of these really interesting things. I'll share one quick story because I think I'm right at time, which works well for our 5-minute Q&A. But I had a student who assigned herself the CEO of Canva, which is Melanie Perkins, if I remember correctly. And she was so happy after her presentation. She came up to me and she said, "Miss Taylor, I think I can be an entrepreneur now." And I was like, "Well, okay, well, like, why do you say that after this presentation? What made you change your mind?" And she said, "Well, I always thought that I wanted to build a tech product, but I don't know how to code." But Melanie Perkins had her tech idea, and then she just built a team who could build the product for her. And I was like, yeah, that's a big part of what entrepreneurs do. You don't have to know how to do
Ella, please report to the main office.
you don't have to know how to do everything, but you do have to have a sense of where you want the project to go. Guiding it is the biggest part of your job. And so I get a lot of joy from watching the students learn new things by getting space to find things that they are interested in and get inspired by stories that look closer to what they might want for themselves. So I have talked to you for long enough, but last thing I'll share are resources on YIPY and then some external resources. So I have 2 resources on YIPY right now. One of them is the 15 Black women entrepreneurs to know that Robin mentioned at the top of the presentation. The other I just added in preparation for Black History Month is 30 Black entrepreneurs to know across several different industries. And this one I really tried to focus on doing some deep research and finding entrepreneurs that a lot of us don't know about or talk about. So while we love the Oprahs of the world, there are a lot more that are doing really interesting work, that are building companies right now that haven't already made it to the ultimate pinnacle of success, but can really be a guide to your students and show them what it might look like if they started to build a company now. What could it look like in 2 or 3 years? What could it look like in 5 years? And these entrepreneurs, I think, will give them a good sense of that. In addition to my YIPY resources, there's also some external resources that I would love to point you to, and Robin has links to all of these, so you might get that in an email after this, I believe. But elementary school, middle school, and high school, the first one is some coloring pages that also give some facts about Black innovators. The second is The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind. Shout out to Robin for this recommendation. And it's a great story about a young boy in Malawi who found a way to help his community get access to power by putting really interesting resources together on his own. And this is a youth readers version. And then the last is a Black Inventors video, which you can use in a bunch of different ways for your high school students, but shows really incredible Black innovators throughout history, and how our world would look different if not for their innovations. So I will leave it there. Thank you so much for listening. And I would love to answer any questions if folks have them.
DeAndrea, you had mentioned another book that was in addition to the one I recommended. Do you remember
Yeah.
the name? I don't have that handy.
Oh, I don't remember the name, but I'll send it to you. But it was a kind of kid version of the story of the Black innovator who invented the Super Soaker, which is very
Right.
fun
And it was
for a
a
lot of.
student, if I remember too. So I will dig that up, and in the follow-up material, I will have both of those recommendations for all of our teachers and
Okay,
educators on the
perfect.
site.